A winter morning in Wyoming looked peaceful enough to forgive the world. Then an old German shepherd named Cairn smelled gas beneath the ice. Below the ravine, a woman lay trapped in a wrecked car, still clutching a bag of old film. Harlan Pierce thought he was only saving a stranger from the snow. But the woman was Evelyn Shaw, mother of the man who once died saving him. And what she carried was not just evidence, it was the memory of a valley powerful men wanted erased. If this story touches you, tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers so we can keep writing stories like this. Winter in the Wind River Range did not arrive like weather. It arrived like judgment. It whitened the roofs, buried the fence lines, softened the fallen trees, and made every sound in the valley feel farther away than it really was. By mid-January, the mountains around Harlan Pierce's cabin stood like old stone kings in ermine robes, bright beneath the morning sun and merciless in their silence. Harlan had once known how to live inside noise, rotor blades, gunfire, men shouting through dust, a dog's breath beside his knee, a radio cracking with half a sentence that could decide whether someone walked home or became a name spoken carefully at memorials. Now, at 48, he lived where silence had teeth. His cabin sat beyond the last reliable plowed road, tucked among lodgepole pine and wind-bent spruce. Smoke rose from the chimney only when he remembered to feed the stove. The porch sagged slightly on the east side. A coil of rope hung by the door. Beside it stood 2 pairs of boots, one pair his, mud-dark and scarred, the other not boots at all, but the patient tracks of the only creature who still followed him from room to room without asking him to become easier to love. Cairn lifted his head from the rug near the stove when Harlan moved. The German shepherd was 9 years old, large-framed and black-backed, with deep wheat-gold fur along his legs and chest and a broad saddle of charcoal across his spine. Age had silvered his muzzle and softened the dark mask around his eyes, but it had not taken the watchfulness from him. His left ear carried a hooked scar along the rim, an old crescent of pale skin that showed when the light caught it. Around his neck hung a worn brown leather collar and a small leather tag stamped by hand. Cairn. E. S. Harlan tried not to look at the initials too often. He pulled on his olive combat shirt in the cold half-light of the cabin. The torso fit close, faded from years of washing, while the camouflage sleeves held the memory of another life. Across the biceps, darker horizontal bands broke the pattern. It was not a uniform anymore. It was only fabric. At least that was what Harlan told himself each time he reached for it instead of something softer. He shrugged into his waxed canvas coat, checked the stove, then paused near the table. A photograph lay there under a chipped coffee mug. 3 men in desert dust. 1 dog blurred at the edge of the frame. 1 younger version of Harlan standing stiffly, as if even then he had been practicing how not to need anyone. Beside him, Eli Shaw grinned like the world had tried to scare him and failed. Harlan turned the mug so it covered Eli's face. Cairn watched him do it. "Don't start," Harlan muttered. Cairn blinked once, which was his usual answer when humans embarrassed themselves. The morning had come white and hard after a night of snow. Harlan needed fuel for the generator, salt for the steps, and feed from the small supply store down toward Mercy Vale. He did not need company. Cairn disagreed, as Cairn disagreed with most of Harlan's worst ideas, and stood by the door before Harlan had even picked up the truck keys. "You're old," Harlan said. Cairn's ears rose. "I said old, not useless." The dog gave 1 low breath through his nose and stared at the door. That settled it. The truck started on the 3rd try, coughing like a stubborn old mule dragged out of bed before sunrise. Harlan let it warm while he cleared snow from the windshield. The cold bit through his gloves. Pines creaked under their white burden. Somewhere high on the ridge, a raven called once, then thought better of the morning. Cairn climbed into the passenger side with effort. He tried to hide. Harlan noticed. He always noticed. He drove slowly down the mountain road, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the gearshift. The world beyond the glass was blinding in places and shadowed in others, the kind of winter brightness that made depth hard to judge. Ditches disappeared. Ice wore snow like a clean shirt. The road bent and narrowed where the land dropped toward Frozen Lark Ravine, a long cut of rock and blue ice where meltwater ran in summer and danger slept politely in winter. Harlan had driven that road enough times to know where the wind laid drifts across it. He knew which trees leaned after storms, which curves held black ice, which stretches invited tourists to trust beauty more than physics. He did not expect Cairn to stand. The dog rose suddenly in the passenger seat, stiff enough that the leather creaked beneath his paws. His head lowered toward the cracked window. His nostrils worked fast, then slow, then fast again. Harlan's eyes went to the road. What? Cairn did not bark. That was worse. He made a sound low in his chest, not fear, not anger. A warning pressed down until it became almost private. Harlan eased off the gas. The road ahead looked empty. Snowbanks, pines, pale sky. No fresh tire tracks except his own, and a faint older set half filled by wind-blown powder. But Cairn's body had changed. The old dog leaned toward the right side of the road, toward the ravine, every muscle speaking a language Harlan had learned before he learned to sleep badly. Then the smell reached him. Thin, wrong, almost swallowed by cold. Gasoline. Beneath it, something sharper. Brake fluid, maybe. Hot metal cooled too fast. Harlan pulled over hard enough that the truck slid a foot before the tires caught. Cairn was already whining through his nose, pawing once at the door. "Stay until I say." Cairn froze, offended but obedient. Harlan stepped out into thigh-deep powder near the shoulder. The cold struck his face clean. He scanned the ravine, at first seeing only white shapes and broken brush. Then the light shifted across the slope, and a dark angle appeared where no dark angle belonged. A vehicle, not on the road. Below it, half hidden under fresh snow, a dark green Subaru lay tilted against a shelf of ice, nose down, rear wheels partly buried. One tail light glinted like a small red wound. Harlan's mind emptied itself of everything unnecessary. No ghosts, no memories, no guilt. Only distance, slope, fuel, ice, time. He opened the truck, grabbed a tow line, emergency blanket, glass breaker, and first aid kit. Cairn jumped down before Harlan could stop him, landing stiffly, then steadying himself. "I said stay." Cairn looked toward the ravine. For one strange second, the dog did not seem old at all. He looked like something carved by the mountain to remind men that loyalty could have claws. Harlan clipped the tow line to the truck frame and looped the other end around his waist as a safety drag. He moved down the slope sideways, boots breaking crust, one gloved hand punching into snow for balance. Cairn remained at the top, pacing the edge, whining low, then barking once. One bark. Harlan glanced back. Cairn barked again, a rhythm, not panic, counting. "Yeah," Harlan breathed. "I hear you." The Subaru shifted slightly when Harlan reached it. The front end had broken through a skin of ice where runoff had frozen over brush. Gas dripped from somewhere under the chassis in slow, bright drops. Harlan could hear the faint tick of cooling metal. Inside, someone moved. He cleared snow from the driver's window with his sleeve. The glass was cracked white. Behind it, an elderly woman hung sideways against the seat belt, her silver-white hair fallen loose from a low knot. Blood marked one temple. Her eyes were closed. One arm was pinned awkwardly across her chest, wrapped around a waterproof camera bag, as if even unconscious she had decided what mattered. "Ma'am." Harlan struck the window with his palm. "Can you hear me?" No answer. Cairn barked from above. 3 short bursts this time. The smell of gas thickened. Harlan used the glass breaker near the rear window first, away from her face. The crack snapped wide. Cold air rushed in. He reached through, unlocked the door, then had to brace his shoulder against the frame to keep it from dropping open too fast. The car groaned. "Easy," he told the vehicle, as if machines listened better than men. He crawled partly inside, cutting the seatbelt with the knife from his pocket. The woman sagged. He caught her with one arm and checked her breathing. Shallow, but there. Pulse thin and stubborn. "Good," he said. "Stay stubborn." Her eyelids fluttered. "Eli," she whispered. The name struck him in the chest. For half a second, the ravine vanished. Dust, heat, a wall of sound. Eli's hand gripping his vest. A voice laughing through blood and grit, telling him to move. "Pierce, move!" because dying in this particular ditch would be bad manners. Cairn barked again. The mountain returned. Harlan swallowed hard and forced his body back into the present. The woman did not know what she had said. People said all kinds of names when pain opened the wrong doors. He wrapped the emergency blanket around her shoulders, secured his line, and began the ugly work of getting her out without letting the car slide. Twice the snow gave beneath his knee. Once the Subaru shifted and dropped an inch with a sound like ice cracking its knuckles. Cairn's barking changed. One bark, pause, one bark, pause. A metronome at the edge of danger. Harlan used it without meaning to. Pull, brace, breathe, check her head, pull again. By the time he dragged her clear of the vehicle, sweat had gone cold beneath his shirt, and his injured lower back had started to burn. The woman was light in the way older people sometimes became light after years of carrying too much. That made him angrier than it should have. At the top of the ravine, Cairn backed away from the edge to give him room, then pressed his shoulder against Harlan's thigh as the woman came over the lip of the road. "Good dog," Harlan said, too quietly for anyone but the dog and God to hear. He got her into the truck, reclined the seat, wrapped another blanket around her, and turned the heater high. Then he called dispatch. Reception came and went, the signal coughing between the ridges. He gave location, condition, vehicle status, possible fuel leak. The dispatcher told him a rescue unit was on its way, but delayed by a small slide farther down the county road. "How delayed?" Harlan asked. A pause. 40 minutes, maybe more. Harlan looked at the woman. Her lips had a bluish cast. Her eyelids trembled. The camera bag was still locked in her hands. "I'm moving her to my vehicle and keeping her warm. Tell them to look for my truck on the north shoulder above Frozen Lark." "Sir, do you know the victim?" Harlan looked at Cairn. The dog had climbed into the back seat and was staring at the woman, not with alarm, but with a strange, steady attention. His scarred ear tilted forward. His nose moved once toward her coat, then toward the leather tag at his own collar. "No," Harlan said, but the answer already felt untrue. The woman stirred as the heater filled the cab with dry warmth. Her eyes opened halfway, pale blue and unfocused. She looked past Harlan at first, through the windshield, at the white ravine and the torn road and the sky too bright for mercy. Then her gaze lowered. Cairn had edged closer between the seats. The woman's breath caught. Not because of fear. Harlan knew fear. This was recognition arriving before the mind had room for it. Her trembling fingers released the camera bag with one hand and reached toward Cairn's left ear. She did not grab. She touched the air just beside the hooked scar, as if afraid the dog might disappear if she made contact too quickly. Cairn stood still. The woman's eyes moved to the collar, to the old leather tag. Cairn, E.S. Her mouth opened, but no sound came at first. Harlan felt the cold inside him shift. the kind of cold that did not belong to Wyoming. "Where did you get this dog?" she whispered. Harlan did not answer right away. Outside, the wind moved loose snow across the road in pale ribbons. Gasoline still breathed faintly from the ravine below. Somewhere beyond the bend, rescue sirens had not yet begun. The world held itself in that thin, bright pause before a life divided into before and after. The woman looked up at him then. Really looked. Her face was lined by age and pain, but something in the bones of it carried an echo. Not Eli's grin, not his youth. Something older than both. The shape grief took when it had learned to stand upright. "My son," she said, voice breaking softly around the words. "My son Eli told me about a dog with that scar." Harlan's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Cairn lowered his head and rested his muzzle against the woman's knee. She closed her eyes, and one tear slipped sideways into her silver hair. "Eli," she whispered again. This time, Harlan knew it was not the accident speaking. It was the dead reaching through the living, not as a ghost, not as thunder, but as a leather tag on an old dog's collar and a name neither of them had been ready to hear. He sat very still while the heater hummed and the snow shone white around them. The woman he had pulled from the ice was Evelyn Shaw, and the man who had saved Harlan's life years ago had just returned to him through his mother's trembling hand. Mercyvale County Clinic was not built for drama. It was built for sprained wrists, winter coughs, ranch hands who waited too long to admit a cut needed stitches, and old men who claimed a chest pain was probably breakfast disagreeing. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic, wet wool, burnt coffee, and the faint metallic breath of the radiator beneath the window. Harlan Pierce sat in a plastic chair too small for his shoulders, elbows resting on his knees, his waxed canvas coat dark with melting snow. His hands looked calm. They usually did. Calm hands had gotten him through worse mornings than this one. The rest of him was less convincing. Across the narrow exam room, Evelyn Shaw sat on the edge of the paper-covered table, while a nurse cleaned the cut near her temple. She had refused to lie back after the doctor checked her pupils, which told Harlan something about her before she said much of anything. Some people mistook age for surrender. Evelyn wore age like a weathered field coat, patched, faded, and still useful. Her silver-white hair had been pinned up again with two small metal clips the nurse found in her coat pocket. A bruise was beginning to bloom along her cheekbone. One hand rested on the waterproof camera bag in her lap. The other hand lay lightly on Cairn's head. The German shepherd had placed himself under the exam table beside her boots, not quite sleeping, not quite standing guard. His body filled the space with quiet purpose. Every time a cart rattled in the hallway, his scarred left ear twitched. Every time Evelyn's fingers tightened, Cairn leaned against her shin, just enough for her to notice. The nurse, a square-shouldered woman with kind eyes and no patience for heroic nonsense, finished taping a bandage above Evelyn's brow. "You should stay overnight in Riverton," she said, "at least for observation." Evelyn gave her a small smile. "That is a very reasonable suggestion." The nurse waited. "I'm not doing it," Evelyn added. The nurse looked at Harlan as if men with broad shoulders were somehow responsible for convincing stubborn women over 70 to behave sensibly. Harlan shook his head. "I met her an hour ago." "That has never stopped a man from offering an opinion before," Evelyn said. For the first time that morning, Harlan almost smiled. Almost. The doctor came in after that, a tired man with rimless glasses and a name tag that read Dr. Feld. He explained the concussion risks, the stitches, the soreness that would arrive by evening like an overdue bill. Evelyn listened politely, nodded in all the right places, and signed the refusal form with a hand that trembled only after the pen left the paper. Harlan noticed that too. He noticed the way she held herself upright, because lying down would mean admitting the day had already taken too much. He noticed that she kept the camera bag close even when the nurse offered to put it on the chair. He noticed that Cairn had not moved from her side since the truck. Outside the exam room window, snow slid from the clinic roof in soft collapses. The town beyond the glass looked clean and harmless. A post office, a bakery with blue trim, a hardware store with a faded elk painted on the wall. Mercy Vale wore winter beautifully. Harlan had learned long ago that beautiful places could hide rot in their foundations as easily as ugly ones. When the doctor left, Evelyn sat very still. "Mr. Pierce," she said. "Harlan?" She looked down at Cairn's collar. "Eli called you Pierce in his letters." The name moved through him like a hand brushing a bruise. "He called everyone by last name when he wanted to sound important," Harlan said. "He was terrible at sounding important." He was. The small agreement hung between them, fragile and oddly warm. Harlan had spent years avoiding conversations where Eli's name might enter the room. Now the name sat there beside an old dog and a woman with a bandage on her temple, and somehow the ceiling did not fall. Evelyn opened the camera bag. Harlan straightened before he meant to. Inside were several black film canisters sealed in plastic sleeves, a folded packet of old survey maps, a notebook wrapped in oilcloth, and a compact camera body with scratched metal edges. None of it looked valuable in the way thieves understood value. No jewels, no cash, no polished heirloom. But Evelyn handled the bag like a priest carrying relics from a burning church. "They told me I had until noon," she said. Harlan waited. The call came at 7:13. I remember because the kettle had just started to whistle. A woman said she was from the county records office. Polite voice. Young, maybe. Hard to tell over the line. She said my complaint review had been moved up because of a scheduling change, and if I wanted the original materials entered before the preliminary closing, I had to bring them in before noon. Harlan's eyes stayed on the film canisters. Did she give a name? Dana something? Or Deanna? I wrote it down. She touched the wrapped notebook, then stopped as if even opening it here, under clinic lights, felt wrong. I knew something about it was off, Evelyn continued. The county does not move fast unless someone is cutting a ribbon or hiding a leak. But she knew the case number. She knew I had objected to the structural violations. She knew about the cemetery parcel. Harlan looked up. At the word cemetery, Cairn opened his eyes. Evelyn's mouth tightened. That is where Eli's marker is, not his body, just his marker. But sometimes a name on stone is the only place a mother can put her hands. Harlan said nothing. There were sentences that would only become smaller if answered. I brought only part of it, she said. The most important negatives, some maps, my exposure logs. I left the rest at home. I thought if the call was genuine, I'd have enough. If it wasn't? She looked at the bandage wrapper in the trash. Apparently, suspicion and wisdom are not the same thing. No, Harlan said, but suspicion kept you from bringing everything. She studied him. It was the first time he saw not just grief in Evelyn Shaw's face, but discipline. Her eyes were pale blue, sharp despite the concussion, and they took his measure without asking permission. You sound like a man who has been ambushed before, she said. Harlan felt Cairn's gaze shift to him. That road didn't do this by itself, he said. I know. The words came too quickly. He leaned back. How? Evelyn looked toward the closed exam room door, her voice lowered, though no one was outside. Because 2 weeks ago, a man came to my house wearing a jacket with a county service patch. He said they were offering winter safety checks for seniors on rural roads. Tires, lights, fluids, that kind of thing. He had a clipboard. He knew my name. He knew I lived alone. Harlan's jaw tightened. I almost sent him away, she said. Then he mentioned black ice near the ravine and told me another widow had gone off the road last year. I let him look at the car. What did he look like? Average, which is a talent, I suppose. Brown beard, cap low, smelled faintly of peppermint gum and gasoline. Harlan looked down at Cairn. The dog's nose had lifted. Evelyn followed his gaze. He smelled it too, didn't he? At the ravine, yes. No one believes old women when we say something is wrong unless a dog agrees first. Evelyn's expression softened with a humor so dry it nearly cracked. No offense to the dog. Cairn exhaled through his nose. None taken, Harlan said. The clinic released Evelyn just after noon with strict instructions she had no intention of obeying. Harlan drove her not home, but first to the county impound lot where the tow truck had brought the Subaru. He did not ask permission from himself. He only heard Eli's name again and knew the day had already chosen him. The impound lot sat behind a chain-link fence rimmed with snow. A faded sign warned visitors about liability in 3 different ways. The tow operator, a lean man in a yellow knit cap, remembered Harlan from a generator repair job years back and let them through after making a face at the paperwork. 10 minutes, he said, and don't bleed on anything I got to inventory. Evelyn waited by Harlan's truck with Cairn beside her while Harlan crouched near the Subaru. The vehicle looked smaller now, ashamed of itself under daylight. Snow packed the wheel wells. The front bumper was cracked. Ice clung to the undercarriage in clear teeth. Harlan did not see a clean cut. That bothered him less than it should have. A clean cut was easy. A clean cut shouted. This was quieter. He slid under the edge as far as the snow allowed, flashlight between his teeth, gloved hand moving along the brake line. Near one coupling, the residue was dark and slick, not torn apart, not severed, loosened, worked open just enough to leak under pressure, then worsened by cold road vibration and panic braking on a downgrade. Whoever had done it had not wanted a guaranteed failure in the driveway. They had wanted uncertainty. Uncertainty made good camouflage. He came out slowly, wiping his glove on a rag. Evelyn watched his face. Well? You were supposed to have brakes until you needed them most. Her eyes closed for one breath. Not fear. Confirmation. Sometimes confirmation hurt more than surprise because it took away the last mercy of doubt. Cairn stepped forward and sniffed the lower panel near the driver's side. He did not bark. He simply stood there, nose close to the metal, then looked back toward Evelyn. His scarred ear tilted, and the leather tag at his collar swung once in the cold light. Evelyn reached for the tag. "E.S.," she said. "Eli Shaw." Harlan nodded. "He sent me a photograph," she said. "Years ago. A young shepherd with one foolish ear and too much sadness in his face." Eli wrote that the dog had failed one test and passed another no one had written down. Harlan looked away toward the fence. "He told me Cairn would keep someone alive someday," Evelyn continued. "I thought he meant in the field." "So did I." Evelyn's fingers rested on the tag. Maybe boys who go to war think too small about saving. Harlan wanted to step back from that sentence. Instead, he stayed. Behind them, wind dragged loose snow across the lot. The impound sign creaked. Farther down the road, Mercy Vale looked peaceful in the hard blue afternoon, church steeple tucked between pines, storefront windows shining, mountains rising behind it, all like a wall painted by a generous God with a cruel sense of timing. Evelyn zipped the camera bag closed. "There's more," she said. Harlan gave a tired breath. "There usually is." At that she smiled for real, though the bruise along her cheek made it painful to look at. "Crown Meridian Lodge," she said. "Do you know the name?" "I've seen the signs." "Then you've seen the future they purchased before asking who already lived in it." She pointed with her chin toward the mountains south of town, where a new billboard rose above the highway. Even from the impound lot, Harlan could see the clean design. Glass walls, warm lights, steam rising from a pool, while snow fell around beautiful people who had never patched a roof in their lives. "They call it a resort," Evelyn said. "Spa, ski access, private cabins, geothermal wellness. Lovely words. Words with clean fingernails. What do they want from you?" "My house, my neighbors' houses, the old access road, a strip of land behind the cemetery, and what runs beneath all of it." "Water?" "Heat," she said. "The old hot springs line. My husband used to say the valley had a dragon sleeping under it. Turns out dragons attract investors." Harlan glanced back at the Subaru. "And the county?" "The county has discovered sudden concern for safety. Porches that stood 80 years are now structural hazards. Barns are fire risks. Fences are encroachments. Drainage ditches are violations. Every letter arrives with polite regret and a deadline." "People selling?" "Some. What else can they do? Hire engineers? Fight maps? Pay fines on fixed income while someone in a wool coat explains opportunity?" She stopped herself, not because she had run out of anger, but because anger cost breath and she was already tired. Harlan thought of the film canisters in her bag, small black cylinders holding light from years before. Proof, maybe. Memory, certainly. He had never trusted memory much. His own had become an enemy after the war, returning without permission, choosing its hours like a drunk with keys. But Evelyn had made memory a craft. She had dated it, framed it, developed it in red light, hung it from lines until it dried into something no one could easily deny. "What's on the film?" he asked. "Fence lines before the new survey, the cemetery boundaries, old spring vents, Harris Coal standing beside the county marker before they moved the maps." She hesitated. "And people. Mostly people. That is what developers always forget to erase first." Harlan absorbed the names he did not yet know. Harris Coal, Crown Meridian, county markers, spring vents. It was too much for a man who had intended to buy generator fuel and feed before noon. Cairn leaned against Evelyn's leg. That small movement decided more than Harlan wanted to admit. The dog did not belong to the past in that moment. He did not belong to Eli, or to Harlan, or to any mission buried in dust. He belonged to the living woman standing in the snow with a stitched temple and a camera bag full of fragile evidence. Harlan looked at Evelyn. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." Her chin lifted. "Mr. Pierce." "Harlan." "Harlan," she said, accepting the correction like a temporary treaty. "I have lived alone a long time." "That isn't the same as being safe." "No," she said, "it is not." She looked toward the mountains, then toward town, then down at Cairn. The dog had lowered his head, eyes half closed, but his body remained angled between her and the open lot. Evelyn's face changed then, not softening exactly. More like something locked inside her shifted one notch. Harlan saw a mother recognizing a pattern older than law and uglier than grief. Danger had found her once in the road, and it might be waiting at her own door. "I need to see my darkroom," she said. "Not today. Today especially. You have a concussion." "I have negatives that may be all that keeps a cemetery from becoming a service road." Harlan rubbed one hand over his mouth. The stubble rasped against his glove. Cairn looked up at him. Of course he did. "You're both terrible at resting," Harlan said. Evelyn gave him that small, painful smile again. Eli was, too. The name no longer hit as sharply. It still hurt, but the hurt had changed shape. It was not a bullet now. It was a door handle, cold in the palm, waiting to be turned. Harlan opened the truck door for her. "We go to your house," he said. "You look from the porch. I check the darkroom first. Cairn stays with you." Evelyn considered arguing. Cairn stood and shook snow from his coat, ending the debate with a dignity neither human could match. The drive out of the impound lot was slow. Mercy Vale passed around them in quiet winter fragments. A plow truck idling near the courthouse, flags snapping stiff in the wind, old houses wearing snow on their shoulders, a bakery sign swinging above a cleared sidewalk. People moved behind windows. Warmth existed in squares of yellow light. Harlan kept both hands on the wheel. Beside him, Evelyn held the camera bag in her lap. Cairn sat behind them, his muzzle between the seats, close enough that his breath warmed Harlan's wrist when the truck turned toward the lake road. No one spoke for a while. Then Evelyn said very quietly, "Eli told me once that you were hard to know, but easy to trust." Harlan stared ahead. He was generous. He was observant. The road curved toward the frozen lake, and beyond the trees, the water shone under snow like a buried mirror. Somewhere past that white shine waited Evelyn Shaw's house, her darkroom, and whatever proof had nearly sent her into a ravine. Harlan had spent years believing he owed the dead his loneliness. Now the mother of the dead sat beside him, alive by a margin as thin as ice, and Cairn watched over both of them as if the old dog had understood the assignment long before the man did. Mercy Vale looked innocent from the lake road. That was the first thing Harlan Pierce noticed, and it made him trust the place less. The valley opened beneath a pale winter sun, all white roofs, blue shadows, and smoke rising straight from chimneys as if each house were saying a prayer no wind dared interrupt. Lake Larkwater lay frozen to the east, bright under its skin of ice, reflecting the mountains so cleanly that the world seemed to have made a second, quieter version of itself beneath the surface. Evelyn Shaw sat beside him in the truck with the camera bag on her lap and the clinic bandage bright against her silver hair. She had not spoken much after they left the impound lot. Pain had settled into her body now that the first shock was gone. Harlan could see it in the careful way she breathed when the road turned rough. Cairn sat in the back, muzzle between the seats, old eyes moving from Harlan to Evelyn and then out toward the white fields. He did not sleep. He had not slept since the ravine. "Pretty, isn't it?" Evelyn said. Harlan kept his eyes on the road. "That a warning or a question?" She gave a faint laugh, then winced at the bruise along her cheek. Both, probably. The town gathered around the north bend of the lake, a church steeple, a post office, a diner with frost along the windows, a hardware store, a library built of brick darkened by many winters. At the far end, where the road began to climb toward the pines, a new billboard rose above a snowbank too clean to be natural. Crown Meridian Lodge. The sign showed glass walls glowing gold against a stormy mountain backdrop. Steam lifted from an outdoor pool. A smiling couple in white robes held mugs beside a fire pit that looked expensive enough to have its own lawyer. Beneath the image, silver letters promised, "Wyoming Wilderness Refined." Harlan slowed without meaning to. Evelyn looked at the billboard, and the small humor left her face. "They put that up before the first public hearing." "Confident." "Hungry," she said. Her house stood beyond the last row of mailboxes, down a narrow road that bent toward the lake and then climbed slightly through old spruce. It was a white wooden place with weathered blue trim and a porch that had been repaired in patches rather than replaced. A dark room sat behind it in a separate outbuilding, small and square, with black painted window shutters and a tin roof buried under snow. Beyond that, a line of pines guarded a footpath climbing toward a low hill. Evelyn saw Harlan looking. "The cemetery is up there," she said. "Not much of one. No angels, no marble gates. Just stones, names, and people who still know where to bring flowers." Harlan parked near the porch. Before he could tell Evelyn to stay put, she opened her door. "You have a concussion," he said. "I have a house." That wasn't an argument. "It has been for 74 years. Phew. Cairn climbed down and went to her side before Harlan could reply. The dog moved slowly, but his body angled between Evelyn and the open yard, as naturally as a shadow following light. The porch steps creaked under them. Evelyn paused at the front door, one gloved hand on the frame. Harlan expected her to unlock it quickly, to hurry toward the darkroom as she had insisted. Instead, she stood still and listened. The house listened back. Old wood ticked in the cold. Somewhere inside, a clock gave one tired click. The place smelled of pine boards, dust, dried lavender, and the faint chemical ghost of photo fixer carried in from the building behind. "Someone has been here," Harlan said. Evelyn did not turn. "No?" He studied the door. No forced marks, no fresh footprints near the porch except a fox track that crossed the yard and vanished under the lilacs. The lock looked untouched. "How do you know?" She pointed to a clay dish on the little table inside the entry. It held keys, 2 pennies, a bent paper clip, and a smooth gray stone. "The stone faces the window," she said. "I leave it facing the door." Harlan looked at her. She shrugged, tired but not embarrassed. "People think old women become suspicious because age makes us frightened. Sometimes we become suspicious because we finally have enough evidence." Cairn lowered his nose to the floorboards and inhaled along the threshold. His tail remained still. Harlan stepped inside first. The house was neat in the way some houses became neat, because grief had trained the owner to control what could still be controlled. Boots lined up under a bench, firewood stacked beside the stove. Framed photographs covered one wall. Lake ice, ranch hands, old women laughing outside church, miners in black coats, young soldiers before departure, men returning older than their faces. One picture held Eli Shaw, not in uniform. He stood on the lake shore in a green flannel shirt, one hand lifted against the sun, smiling as if someone had called him foolish from behind the camera. Harlan looked away too late. Evelyn noticed, but spared him. The dark room was behind the house, and Harlan made her wait on the porch while he checked it. She disliked the instruction enough to tighten her mouth, but Cairn sat beside her boot and rested one paw over the toe as if voting with Harlan. The small building's door was locked. Inside, cold red safe-light bulbs hung above a work counter. Trays, tongs, clipped lines, labeled boxes, sleeves of negatives, and contact sheets filled shelves along 2 walls. It smelled of chemicals, paper, and time. No one was there. But one drawer sat open half an inch. Harlan did not touch it. He backed out and looked at Evelyn. "You opened the drawers before you left?" Her face changed. She came past him, slowly now, not stubbornly, carefully. She stood in the red-lit doorway and looked at the drawer as if it were a wound. "That one holds old survey contact sheets," she said. "Lake Road, Cemetery Hill, spring vents." "Anything missing?" "I have to check." "No?" Harlan's voice came out sharper than he meant. Evelyn turned. He softened it, though not by much. "Not alone, not while you're hurt." For a moment she seemed ready to remind him that she had not invited command into her house. Then Cairn pressed his shoulder against her knee, and something in her gave way, not surrender, but calculation. "Fine," she said. "Then we call June." "June?" "Baxter, structural engineer. If paper could bite, half the county would limp when she enters a room." June Baxter arrived 20 minutes later in a mud-splashed county truck that did not match the clean white snow around it. She climbed out before the engine had fully stopped, boots hitting the ground with the authority of someone who had no patience for symbolic entrances. She was in her early 50s, short silver hair flattened under a gray knit cap, a rust-orange field jacket zipped to the chin, and black work pants dusted with sawdust and road salt. A tape measure hung from one pocket. A small silver level rode in the other like a charm. Her face was square, wind-burned, and built for direct weather. She saw Evelyn's bandage and swore once, quietly but with craftsmanship. I told you not to drive alone with originals. Evelyn lifted her chin. Good afternoon to you, too. June looked at Harlan. Her eyes moved over the combat shirt beneath his coat, the shoulders, the stillness, the dog, then returned to his face. You the one who pulled her out? Yes? Good. Don't let it become a habit. Around here, people start expecting competence from anyone who shows it once. Cairn stepped forward and sniffed her glove. June held still. You can inspect me, she told him, but I charge by the hour. Cairn seemed to approve, or at least decided she was not today's problem. Inside the dark room, June did not ask unnecessary questions. She photographed the open drawer before touching it, checked the sill, the floor, the lock, the faint scuff near the back corner where black paint had flaked from the baseboard. Someone came in with a key or a very tidy tool, she said. No splintering, no hurry. Evelyn stood by the counter, one hand braced against the edge. They were looking for the survey sheets. June opened the drawer fully, using a cloth between her fingers and the handle. Contact sheets lay inside in careful folders. Evelyn checked them with trembling control. Nothing obvious was missing. That may be worse, June said. Harlan looked at her. If they didn't take anything, they wanted to confirm where it was. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. The red light made everyone look carved from old blood and winter wax. June took a folder from her satchel and placed it on the counter. Since we're all done pretending this is a normal day. The folder contained copies of inspection notices. Harlan recognized the official tone before he understood the content. It was the same language used by organizations that wanted cruelty to wear a clean shirt. Immediate structural concern, potential public hazard, non-compliance review pending, corrective action required before transfer approval. June tapped 3 separate pages. Different houses, same paragraph, not similar, same, word for word except the address. Evelyn said, I knew it. You suspected it, June corrected. Now I know it. Harlan studied the attached photographs, a porch rail, a barn beam, a drainage ditch. The angles were poor, shadows heavy. The images seemed designed less to show the truth than to prevent anyone from seeing enough of it. June slid 1 page toward him. This one is supposed to be Evelyn's porch. Harlan looked at the photograph, then out through the dark-room door toward the house. It isn't. No. June's mouth tightened. It's a derelict hunting cabin near South Fork. I inspected it after a snow collapse 2 years ago. Why use the wrong photo? Because the right porch is ugly but safe. June's hand flattened over the papers. And ugly but safe does not frighten people into selling. The statement landed quietly, but it changed the room. Until that moment, Harlan had understood the danger as a line cut loose, a car in a ravine, one woman nearly dead under ice. Now the danger widened. It became porches, barns, maps, letters, deadlines. It became a machine that did not need to hate anyone personally because it had learned to erase them in batches. Evelyn reached into her camera bag and withdrew a small notebook wrapped in oilcloth. The cover was blue cloth, softened at the corners from years of use. My exposure log, she said. June's expression shifted from irritation to reverence. You still have the originals? Since 1979. Harlan watched Evelyn open the notebook. Inside, narrow handwriting filled page after page. Dates, weather, lens, direction of light, subject, roll number, January fog, Cemetery Hill, county marker, south fence after thaw, Eli by lake, last snow before enlistment. Her finger paused on that line, then moved on. Harlan realized what he was looking at, not a diary, not nostalgia, a ledger of light. A woman had spent half her life recording a valley so precisely that memory itself had become evidence. Outside, a truck turned into the drive. June looked through the dark-room doorway. That'll be Wade. The man who stepped out of the old sedan did not look like someone entering a fight. He looked like a man who had already lost one and kept the paperwork. Wade Moran was 61, tall but slightly stooped, wrapped in a brown tweed overcoat that had survived more winters than fashion should allow. A navy scarf hung crookedly at his throat. Silver hair fell in one loose strand over his forehead, and a narrow mustache gave his tired face a kind of old courtroom dignity. He carried a leather briefcase scarred at the corners. He saw Evelyn, and his expression folded. "Evie?" "I'm intact enough," she said. "That is not the same as fine." "No, but it is more useful." Wade gave Harlan a brief nod, the kind men gave when gratitude was too large to unpack in a cold yard. Then he entered the dark room and saw June's papers on the counter. His tiredness sharpened. "Oh," he said softly. "They got lazy." June gave him a look. Or confident. Same disease, different stage. Wade opened his briefcase and removed a folder tied with string. "Harris sent me copies of these 3 days before he died." Evelyn went still. Harlan noticed the name. Harris. Wade did not dramatize it. That made it heavier. "Harris Cole worked county planning for 32 years, Wade said, mostly to Harlan now. "He was boring in the holy way good public servants are boring, kept maps straight, remembered meeting minutes, used red ink only when truly offended." "What happened?" Harlan asked. "Hunting accident last winter." Wade's fingers rested on the string-tied folder. "That is the official version." "And yours?" "My version is not yet admissible." June looked down at the folder. "Wade." "I know." His voice dropped. "But if they are using the same false structural pattern Harris warned me about, then we stop pretending his notes were the paranoia of a tired bureaucrat." He opened the folder. Inside were photocopied maps with red pencil lines marking a curve beneath Mercy Vale. Old spring vents, easements, historic access paths, cemetery boundary, lakeside parcels. One line cut through Evelyn's property and continued toward the hill behind it. Harlan stood over the map and felt the old part of his mind begin arranging the terrain, not as a battlefield, not exactly, but as contested ground. "They want the heat under the valley," he said. Evelyn looked at him. "And the right to decide what sits above it." Wade nodded. "Geothermal access, private wellness pools, service road, utility corridor, maintenance buildings. The cemetery is inconvenient. So are old houses with stubborn owners." Cairn had been lying near the doorway. At the word cemetery, he rose and walked outside. No bark, no sudden warning, just movement. Everyone followed him with their eyes. The dog crossed the snowy yard toward the footpath behind the darkroom. He stopped near the first rise, where the pines opened slightly and the cemetery hill began. He stood facing upward, old body still, scarred ear turned toward the trees. Evelyn watched from the doorway. "Oh." "That path was Eli's shortcut," she said. "When he was home, he'd come up from the lake and sit there before dinner, pretending he wasn't avoiding chores." A little smile touched her mouth, then fell away. Harlan walked out into the snow and stopped beside Cairn. From there, the darkroom, the house, the lake, and the billboard on the far ridge all sat in one line of sight. A mother's house, a room full of negatives, a hill of names, a corporation's promise of refined wilderness. The whole valley looked like a photograph someone powerful had already decided to crop. For the first time since the ravine, Harlan felt something besides shock, guilt, or obligation. He felt orientation. The enemy was not a man with a rifle in a window. It was a polite letter, a doctored photo, a loosened fitting, a map redrawn by someone who never planned to visit the graves. Wade came to stand a few steps behind him. "I won't ask you to get involved," the lawyer said. "That would be unfair." Harlan kept his eyes on the cemetery hill. "Good," he said. "Don't." June made a dry sound from the doorway. "That mean you're leaving?" Harlan looked down at Cairn. The old dog did not turn away from the path. "No," Harlan said. "It means I don't want anyone pretending this is a favor." Evelyn stood in the red-framed doorway of the darkroom, one hand on the jamb, bandage bright against her hair. She looked smaller than the mountains behind her, but not less durable. Wade retied the folder string with careful fingers. "Then we start with copies," he said. "Copies of everything: logs, negatives, inspection notices, Harris's maps. Originals stay hidden until we know who can be trusted." June nodded. "And I want full photographs of every alleged violation before sunset." Evelyn looked toward the cemetery hill. "Sunset comes early in January." "Then we work like people who understand clocks," June said. For a moment, no one moved. Then the valley around them seemed to resume. A crow crossed over the pines, the lake flashed under the sun, and somewhere in town a bell rang the hour. It should have felt peaceful. It did not. Harlan turned back toward the house, already thinking about doors, locks, sight lines, tire tracks, the distance from the road to the darkroom, the time it would take someone to enter and leave without being seen. He had thought earlier that morning that he had found one woman at the bottom of a ravine. Now he understood he had found the edge of something buried under an entire valley. And like gas beneath ice, it had been leaking for a long time. By late afternoon, the dark room had become warmer than the house. Not comfortable, never that. Comfort was too generous a word for a room with blacked-out windows, a concrete floor, chemical trays, and shelves crowded with boxes that smelled of dust, fixer, and old paper. But the small heater in the corner had finally stopped complaining, and the red safe light gave the room a steady pulse, as if the little building had a heart and refused to let winter slow it. Evelyn stood at the work counter with a wool shawl around her shoulders, moving contact sheets into new sleeves. The doctor at the clinic would have been deeply displeased by the fact that she was standing at all, but Harlan had already learned that arguing with Evelyn Shaw was like arguing with a pine tree. One could make a fine case. The tree would remain. June Baxter had taken photographs of the open drawer and gone outside to inspect the porch, muttering about camera angles, false reports, and the moral condition of men who used blurry photos as weapons. Wade Moran sat at the kitchen table inside the house, sorting inspection notices by date, his old briefcase open beside him like a small leather courtroom. Harlan stayed in the darkroom doorway because he could not decide whether he belonged inside. Cairn had decided for him. The German shepherd lay just within the threshold, large body stretched across the line between red light and blue winter dusk, head resting on his paws. One amber-gray eye watched Evelyn. The other kept track of Harlan with the weary patience of a creature accustomed to human cowardice. "You can come in," Evelyn said without turning around. "I am in." "You are haunting the doorway." Doorways are useful. They are also where people stand when they want the right to leave quickly. Harlan had no clean answer to that. Evelyn slid another strip of negatives into a sleeve. Her hands were steadier now, though fatigue had made her face paler. The bandage near her temple looked too white beneath the red light, like a small flag of surrender she refused to acknowledge. On the counter lay contact sheets from years of Mercyvale winters, fence posts leaning under snow, the lake road before it was widened, old spring vents steaming faintly behind a stand of willow, and the cemetery hill before new survey stakes appeared near its base. Each image carried a number. Each number belonged to the blue exposure log. Memory, Harlan thought, had never looked so organized. His memories came like wolves from behind trees. Evelyn's came labeled. She reached for a flat wooden box on the lower shelf, then hesitated. The box was dark walnut, its brass latch dulled by age. Someone had carved 3 uneven initials into the lid with a pocket knife. E.S. Evelyn touched the letters with 2 fingers. "That one isn't land records," Harlan said. "No." She lifted it carefully and set it on the counter. Cairn raised his head. The movement was small, but Evelyn saw it. So did Harlan. "This was Eli's," she said. "Not all of him, of course. A mother learns how little of a son fits into any box." Harlan's chest tightened. "You don't have to open that." "No," she said. "I do." The latch clicked. Inside were letters tied with faded twine, a few photographs curled at the edges, a cloth patch, a matchbook from a diner in Virginia Beach, and several folded scraps of paper covered in quick handwriting. Not official things, not the polished pieces people chose for memorial tables. These were the things a man kept because throwing them away would feel like erasing the parts of himself that had laughed. Evelyn picked up one scrap and read with a fond exasperation that made her look suddenly younger. "Tell Pierce his coffee violates at least 3 treaties and possibly the Geneva Conventions." Against his will, Harlan looked up. Evelyn's mouth twitched. He wrote that twice, apparently. He was dramatic. He was accurate? Harlan said nothing. That was enough. Evelyn set the scrap aside and lifted a photograph. Eli stood in a dusty training yard, leaner than in the lake photo, one hand raised to block the sun. Beside him was Cairn, younger, thinner through the chest, ears uneven, one already carrying the beginning of that hooked scar. The dog's eyes were fixed, not on the camera, but on Eli's hand. Cairn stood slowly, not quickly, not dramatically. The old joints took their time, but he rose, walked to the counter, and looked at the photograph without touching it. Evelyn lowered it so he could see. "There you are," she whispered, before your muzzle went all snowy and dignified. Cairn sniffed the edge of the photo once, then turned his head toward Harlan. The look was not accusation. That made it worse. Evelyn reached deeper into the box and drew out an envelope yellowed at the edges. No stamp, no postmark, just a name written in Eli's hand. Pierce. The room became very quiet. Even the heater seemed to lower its voice. Evelyn held the envelope for a long moment. "I kept this because I did not know where to send it." Harlan stared at the name. "It's been years," he said. "Yes. So whatever's in there has waited longer than either of us deserved." That struck harder than any kindness would have. Harlan took one step inside the room. Cairn moved beside him and sat, shoulder touching his leg. Evelyn did not hand him the envelope right away. "I need to say something first," she told him. Harlan braced himself. For blame, for gratitude, for the unbearable mercy of a mother telling him Eli had died well. But Evelyn said, "I used to be angry with you." The honesty landed clean. Harlan nodded once. "I did not know you," she continued. "I only knew you were alive and my son was not. That is a cruel arithmetic, and grief is not famous for fairness." "No," Harlan said. "Then Eli's letters kept mentioning you, not like a hero, not like a burden, like a man he trusted to stand near him when things went badly. That made anger harder to feed." Her fingers tightened slightly on the envelope. "And then Cairn came to you. Eli arranged it before his last deployment. He told me not to interfere unless the dog looked miserable." A faint, dry smile touched her face. "I received one photograph from a training friend 6 months later. Cairn was lying beside a man in an ugly green shirt who looked like he had lost an argument with sleep. The dog did not look miserable." Harlan swallowed. "That was not my best year." "I gathered." She held out the envelope. Harlan did not take it. His hand lifted halfway and stopped, as if the air between them had turned to glass. He had opened doors in buildings where he expected gunfire. He had cut men free from wreckage. He had climbed into a ravine under a leaking car without giving fear enough time to introduce itself. But a paper envelope with his name on it stopped him cold. Evelyn saw the hesitation and did not pity him. That was a gift. "Fear gets strange as we age," she said. "At 74, I can face a developer with a smile and a folder of negatives, but I still avoid one kitchen cabinet because it holds Eli's favorite mug." Harlan looked at her then. She did not look saintly. She looked tired, bruised, stubborn, and human. It made the letter possible. He took it. The paper felt thin enough to tear under his thumb. Cairn sat so close that his fur brushed Harlan's knee. Harlan opened the envelope carefully, almost clumsily, and unfolded the letter. "Pierce, if you are reading this, either I got sentimental or I got dead, and knowing my luck, it is probably the second one." Harlan stopped. His jaw tightened once. Evelyn turned away slightly, not leaving him alone, but giving him the dignity of not being watched directly. Cairn lowered himself to the floor and rested his head across Harlan's boot. Harlan read on. "I am writing this because you are the kind of man who survives things and then acts like survival is the whole assignment. It is not. Survival is just the door. You still have to walk into the room. Also, your coffee is a crime. I have reported this to no one because I am merciful." A sound came out of Harlan before he could stop it. Not laughter exactly. Something broken with a laugh trapped inside it. Evelyn smiled at the shelves. He kept reading. "They are probably going to wash Cairn out. Too noise-sensitive, too watchful, too good at noticing fear before anyone asks him to. Command wants dogs that push through everything. Cairn does push through. He just insists on knowing what is hurting first, which apparently counts as a character flaw in certain offices full of men with clipboards. He is not broken. Do not let anyone call him that." Harlan's eyes blurred, and he hated it. He blinked hard, once, then again. "If I do not come back, and if the paperwork gods do not eat the request, I want him with you. Not because you need a dog to guard your door. You will do that yourself until the floorboards file complaints. I want him with you because he will know when you are lying. You pretend quiet means control. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it means you are building a room with no windows and calling it discipline. Cairn will not allow that. He will sit in the doorway like a hairy little judge until you come out. He will sigh dramatically. He will make you share blankets. He will remind you that breathing is less embarrassing when someone else is doing it nearby." Harlan lowered the page. The red light blurred around its edges. For years he had carried Eli like debt. A life for a life, a name for a silence. A grave marker for every morning, Harlan woke and wished he hadn't been the one pulled from the dust. He had believed guilt was proof of loyalty. He had polished his pain until it became almost honorable, a cold metal pinned under the skin where no one else could see it. But Eli's words did not sound like a man demanding payment. They sounded like a friend leaving the porch light on. Evelyn's voice came gently. "There's more." Harlan looked down again. "If I do not make it, do not turn me into a shrine. I forbid it. I was annoying. Remember that. I snored once in a supply room and blamed the ventilation system. I cheated at cards badly. I stole your last clean socks and would do it again. Take care of the dog. And if you can manage it, take care of someone who is still alive. That is the part men like us forget when the dead get loud." Eli Harlan finished the letter standing still. Nothing in him exploded. That would have been easier. Instead, something inside him simply unlocked, one old bolt sliding back after years of rust. He folded the page once, then stopped, afraid to fold it along the wrong crease. His hands were shaking now. Not much. Enough. Cairn rose and placed his muzzle on Harlan's thigh. The dog did not whine, did not paw, did not demand. He only stood there with the quiet weight of an old promise fulfilled badly, but not too late. Harlan lowered one hand onto Cairn's head. "I thought you were punishment," he said, so softly that Evelyn almost did not hear. Cairn leaned harder against him. Harlan looked at Evelyn. "I thought he sent me the dog because I owed him." Evelyn's eyes shone in the red room. "Maybe he sent you the dog because he loved you enough not to trust you alone." The words undid him more gently than cruelty ever could have. He did not sob. Harlan Pierce was not built for neat displays of grief. He only bent his head, fingers tightening in Cairn's thick fur, while the red light covered him, Evelyn, and the dog in the color of wounds that had not yet decided whether they could heal. Outside, boots crunched through snow. June appeared in the doorway with a clipboard, saw their faces, and stopped with the rare wisdom of a woman who knew when a fact could wait. Then Wade came behind her, holding one of Harris Cole's copied maps. He removed his glasses slowly. "Bad time?" Harlan wiped one hand down his face and gave a rough breath. "Probably." June looked at Evelyn. "I found the porch report." Evelyn's expression changed at once. The mother remained, but the archivist returned. "And?" "The photo attached to your violation notice is not your porch. It is not even close." South Fork hunting cabin, collapsed east rail, photographed after the 2022 storm. June held up her phone, showing a comparison. Evelyn's blue-trimmed porch under clean snow, then the dark rotted rail from another property. "They used the wrong structure to declare yours unsafe." Wade laid Harris's map on the counter beside Eli's letter, careful not to touch the page. "And Harris marked the proposed utility corridor here," he said, pointing with his fountain pen. "It runs through your lower lot, clips the old access road, and comes within 30 yards of the cemetery boundary." "Within?" June asked. Wade's mouth tightened. "On the newer draft, the boundary moves." Evelyn's hand went to the counter, not dramatic, just enough to hold herself upright. Harlan looked from Eli's letter to the maps. For a moment, the two kinds of evidence lay side by side, one written by a dead soldier to keep a friend among the living, the other drawn by men trying to move the dead out of the way of profit. Something settled in Harlan then. Not rage. Rage was too hot, too easy, too familiar. This was colder and steadier. He picked up the folder of inspection copies, then looked at June and Wade. "What do you need?" Wade studied him. "From you?" "Yes." The lawyer's tired eyes flicked toward Evelyn, then Cairn, then back. "At minimum, a witness statement about the vehicle, photographs of the brake fitting if you can get them, a timeline, and someone with a good eye to check the house tonight." June added, "And someone who can walk the property without stepping on every usable track like a moose in boots." Harlan glanced at her. She did not apologize. Evelyn said quietly, "You do not have to become involved because of Eli." Harlan turned the letter in his hand. "No," he said, "I don't." Cairn's tail moved once against the floor. Harlan looked toward the darkroom door where the winter light beyond had started turning blue. Past the yard stood the house, and past the house the path to the cemetery, and past that the billboard on the ridge promising a refined wilderness, as if refinement meant removing anyone who remembered the wilderness before it was packaged. "I'm not here because of what Eli died doing," Harlan said. The word surprised him by arriving whole. "I'm here because of what he asked me to keep doing." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. Wade closed his folder with a soft final sound. "Then we work carefully." June gave Harlan the porch report. Carefully and fast are not opposites, despite what every bad contractor thinks. Evelyn took Eli's letter and slid it back into its envelope, but she did not return it to the box. She handed it to Harlan. "It was addressed to you." He accepted it. This time his hand did not stop halfway. Cairn stepped with him to the doorway. Outside, the air had sharpened, and the first evening star stood pale above the pines. Harlan could see the path to the cemetery rising through the snow. For years he had believed loyalty meant standing guard over the place where someone had fallen. Now, with Eli's letter inside his coat and Cairn breathing beside him, he began to understand that loyalty could also mean turning toward the living, opening the locked room and stepping out before the dark, finished learning your name. By morning, Mercy Vale had begun to thaw only at the edges. Snow still sat heavy on the roofs, but icicles dripped from porch rails and the road showed 2 dark tire lines where the plow had passed. The valley looked almost gentle in daylight. A person driving through might see chimney smoke, frozen fences, horses nosing hay beneath lean-tos, and think this was a place spared by the world. June Baxter ruined that illusion before breakfast. She spread 5 inspection notices across Evelyn's kitchen table, flattening the corners with a coffee mug, a tape measure, Wade Moran's fountain pen, and a jar of peach preserves that had probably been made before Harlan's last decent night of sleep. "Listen to this," June said. Wade sighed. "I'd rather not, which means you should continue." June read from the first notice. Non-compliant load-bearing exterior feature presents probable seasonal hazard. Then she tapped the second. Same phrase. The third. Same. The fourth. Same. The fifth. They got ambitious here and changed probable to potential. Shakespeare trembles. Evelyn sat wrapped in a dark green cardigan, a cup of tea cooling near her hand. The bruise on her cheek had deepened overnight, but her eyes were clear. Cairn lay beneath her chair, his scarred ear angled toward the room, as though every piece of paper had a smell worth remembering. Harlan stood near the sink, arms folded, Eli's letter folded inside the inner pocket of his coat. He had not slept much, not because of the usual dreams, though they had come sniffing around the edges. He had stayed awake, listening to the house, the settling wood, the tick of the stove, Cairn's breathing near the door, Evelyn moving once in the hallway and then stopping, perhaps remembering she was not alone. Wade gathered the notices into date order. "We need statements from owners, photos of the structures, copies of any offers made after the violations. Especially if the offers came through Crown Meridian or one of their little cousins wearing a different hat." "People won't talk," Evelyn said quietly. June looked up. "Some will." "Not easily." No one said easily. June glanced toward Harlan. "You ever knock on doors for a living?" "No." "Good. Then you won't have bad habits." Harlan stared at her. June tucked the notices into a folder. "Try not to look like you're there to repossess a mule." "I don't know what that looks like." "You're close." For once, Wade laughed first. Their first stop was Greta Sloane's place, a low ranch house with a saddle shop attached to the barn and a wind-battered sign that read, "Sloane Leather and Tack." The yard smelled of hay, horse sweat, wood smoke, and oiled leather. A half-finished saddle sat on a workbench inside the shop, its floral tooling clean as prayer work. Greta came out wearing a canvas apron over a flannel shirt, silver hair braided down her back, a carving knife in one hand, and no visible interest in being impressed by anyone. She was 69, narrow through the hips, strong through the wrists, with the kind of face that had spent decades squinting at weather and nonsense. "If you're here about the barn roof," she told June, "I already called the county office 3 times and got 3 different men telling me 3 different versions of stupid." June smiled. "Then you'll enjoy this visit." Greta's eyes moved to Harlan. "Who's the large, quiet one?" "Harlan Pierce," Evelyn said. "He pulled me out of the ravine." Greta looked him over. "Did you do it competently?" "He did," Evelyn said. "Good. Competent men are rare. Quiet ones are rarer. Usually they're just storing up a speech." Cairn stepped forward and sat just outside the shop door, careful not to crowd her. Greta looked down at him. Her expression shifted before she could stop it. "Well," she said softly, "you look like you've had opinions about humans for a long time." Cairn blinked. "He has a newsletter," Harlan said. Greta snorted, and just like that, the door opened wider. June inspected the barn roof while Wade took Greta's statement at the kitchen table. Harlan stood back, listening. Greta's violation notice claimed the barn's south truss had shifted enough to threaten collapse. June climbed a ladder, tapped the beam with a small hammer, measured the joint, and came down with sawdust on one sleeve and murder in her eyes. "The truss is fine," she said. "Old, but fine. The photo in the notice was taken from an angle that makes the shadow look like a split." Greta folded her arms. "They sent a man 2 days later offering to relieve me of liability." Wade looked up. "Name?" "Didn't give one. Nice boots, soft hands, teeth like a piano keyboard." Greta wiped her knife on her apron. "Said at my age I ought to consider letting someone else carry the burden." Harlan saw Evelyn flinch at that phrase. "Not much." "Enough. At my age." The words were polite as lace and rotten underneath. They left with copies of the notice, photographs, and Greta's promise to testify if someone made the room warm enough and the coffee less insulting than Wade's. "I heard that," Wade said from the porch. "You were meant to," Greta replied. Their second stop was Lionel Vance's radio shop on the west side of town. The building leaned slightly toward the alley, as if eavesdropping on its own customers. Inside, shelves climbed to the ceiling with old receivers, vacuum tubes, cracked microphones, solder spools, and hand-labeled drawers filled with parts nobody under 40 could identify without divine assistance. Lionel himself emerged from behind a workbench wearing a red and black flannel shirt, a gray knit vest, and a magnifying headset pushed up over his forehead. He was 64, round-faced, silver-bearded, and carrying a soldering iron like a man interrupted during surgery. "No refunds," he said. "We haven't bought anything," Wade replied. "Then my policy is working." Evelyn introduced Harlan. Lionel looked at Cairn first. "Dog can come in. People are on probation." Cairn entered and lay down beside an old heater that rattled like it had secrets. Lionel watched him settle. "That's a military dog?" "Former washout," Harlan said. Lionel grunted. "Best machines I ever owned were things somebody said weren't worth fixing." The notice against Lionel concerned the gravel access lane behind his shop. A revised county map labeled it Seasonal Public Maintenance Ground, not private access. Without it, Lionel's delivery trucks could not reach the back bay. Without deliveries, his shop became a museum of dead radios. "My father laid that lane in '58, Lionel said, pulling a rolled map from a tube with grease-stained hands. Before the county remembered we existed. Wade compared Lionel's map against the new one. June took measurements outside. Evelyn, moving more slowly now, photographed the old survey pin half buried near the back fence. Harlan stood in the alley and watched a Crown Meridian flyer tumble along the snow-packed curb. A cleaner future for Mercy Vale. He picked it up. On the back, someone had handwritten a phone number and the words, "Transition assistance. Not theft, not pressure. Assistance." That was the genius of it, Harlan thought. Dress a shove as a helping hand, and half the world would thank you while falling. Lionel came out behind him and caught the flyer from his hand. "They sent those after the map change," Lionel said, like undertakers arriving before the fever breaks. "You call them?" Lionel scoffed. "I called them plenty of things, not the number." Cairn came to stand beside Harlan, then, without warning, leaned his shoulder against Lionel's leg. Lionel went still. The old radio man looked down, solder-burned fingers hovering above Cairn's head. His face, which had managed sarcasm like a trade skill, softened into something unguarded. "My wife liked shepherds," he said, almost to himself. "Said they had better manners than most cousins." He scratched Cairn lightly behind the ear, away from the scar. No one spoke. It was not much. A man touching a dog in an alley. A moment too small to enter any legal brief. But Harlan felt the day changed there. Until then, they had been collecting evidence. Paper against paper. Photo against photo. Now he understood that what Crown Meridian threatened was not only property. It was the invisible architecture that held people upright. A lane a father laid, a barn a woman trusted, a dog remembered by someone's late wife, a valley where every object had a witness. If enough of those things were renamed as errors, hazards, or opportunities, people might begin to believe they themselves were in the way. Harlan looked down at the flyer. He did not crumple it. He folded it carefully and handed it to Wade. "Add it," he said. By afternoon, Nora Whitcomb had tea waiting at the Mercy Vale Library, because Evelyn had called ahead, and because Nora considered surprise visitors a threat best defeated with hot water and indexed files. The library was brick, warm, and smelled of old paper, lemon oil, and the faint sweetness of dust caught in sunbeams. Nora was 67, small and round, with bright brown eyes behind round brass-framed glasses and a bob of silver blonde hair clipped on one side. She moved fast for someone carrying 3 folders, 2 mugs, and the moral authority of every librarian who had ever told a town council they were wrong. "I knew someone would need those boxes eventually," she said, before anyone asked. Wade removed his scarf. "You could have mentioned that last year. You could have written legibly on your request forms last year. That was a low blow." It was a documented blow. Nora led them downstairs to the archive room, where metal shelves held decades of local newspapers, tax maps, church bulletins, parade photographs, flood records, and the kind of paper a town forgot until someone tried to erase it. From a lower shelf, she pulled out 2 archival boxes labeled Shaw, photo donation /unprocessed. Evelyn touched the label. "I thought those were duplicates." "They are," Nora said. "Mostly. Duplicates are how history survives human confidence." Inside were contact sheets, envelopes, newspaper clippings, and older maps showing property lines before the recent revisions. One photograph showed the cemetery hill in summer, grasses high, white markers bright against dark pine. Another showed Harris Cole standing beside a county boundary marker with a survey rod in his hand and a face so bored by dishonesty that Harlan almost liked him. Nora tapped the photo. "That ran in the paper 12 years ago. Public Land Access Review." Wade leaned closer. "Do you have the issue?" Nora's expression offended the room. "Of course I have the issue." Cairn lay under the archive table and sighed deeply, as if even he recognized that librarians were their own branch of government. They spent 2 hours making copies. Evelyn identified roll numbers. June matched photos to current violation notices. Wade built a chain of documents, his fountain pen moving faster than his age suggested. Harlan carried boxes, held doors, checked windows, and tried to stay useful without turning every room into a perimeter. At 6, they walked into the community hall for Crown Meridian's scheduled listening session. The hall was bright with fluorescent light and full of winter coats. Farmers, retirees, shop owners, seasonal workers, and a few people Harlan recognized from the diner stood in uncertain clusters. At the front of the room, beside a projector screen showing a sleek rendering of the proposed resort, stood Conrad Bellamy. He was 58, trim, silver-haired, and dressed in a camel cashmere coat over a black turtleneck, as though winter itself had agreed to flatter him. His smile was practiced but not false. That made it worse. He looked like a man who believed entirely in the virtue of his own plans. "Mercy Vale has always been beautiful," Conrad was saying as they entered. "Our goal is not to erase that heritage, but to elevate it." Harlan felt June stiffen. "Elevate," she muttered. "There's a word with clean fingernails." Conrad spoke of jobs, infrastructure, improved roads, health tourism, sustainable geothermal design, and respectful transition options for legacy owners. He used legacy the way other men used expired. When questions began, most people stayed quiet. A woman asked about traffic, a rancher asked about water. Conrad answered with patience polished to a shine. Then Evelyn stood. The hall changed, not loudly, more like a house feeling a storm press against the windows. Evelyn held up a photograph of the cemetery hill before the new survey lines. "Can you explain why your utility corridor draft moves a boundary that has stood in county records for over 60 years? Conrad's smile dimmed by one candle. "Mrs. Shaw," he said gently, "first, let me say how sorry we all are to hear about your accident." Harlan felt Cairn move beside him. Conrad continued, "But I would caution everyone against drawing conclusions from old photographs without professional review. Grief can make certain places feel fixed in ways that records do not always support." The room went cold, not because he had shouted, because he had not. He had laid a hand on Evelyn's grief in front of everyone and used it to move her aside. Harlan stepped forward before he knew he had decided to. Cairn touched his muzzle to Harlan's hand. Not hard, not a command, a reminder. Harlan stopped. His pulse was steady. His anger was not. Eli's letter sat inside his coat like a weight against his ribs. Take care of someone who is still alive. So he did, by staying still. June stepped into the aisle. Professional review is exactly what this is. She lifted copies of the inspection notices. 3 violation reports attached photographs that do not match the properties named. One of those reports concerns Mrs. Shaw's porch. The attached image is from South Fork, 2 years old. Murmurs moved through the hall. Wade stood next, not theatrical, not loud. "Mr. Bellamy, did Crown Meridian or any affiliated acquisition group receive copies of these violation notices before property owners did?" Conrad's eyes flicked to him. "I'm not prepared to discuss individual documents in this forum." Nora, from the second row, raised her hand while already speaking. "The library has archived maps contradicting the revised boundary draft." Lionel called from the back, "And my access lane didn't become public land by divine revelation." A few people laughed, nervously at first, then less nervously. Evelyn held her photograph steady. Harlan looked around the hall and saw doors opening inside people's faces. Suspicion becoming permission. Fear realizing it had neighbors. Conrad recovered quickly. Men like him always did. He thanked everyone for their passion, promised transparency, and suggested that misinformation often travels fastest in anxious communities. But his hand, Harlan noticed, kept turning a silver pen between his fingers. After the meeting, people did not rush home. They gathered around June, Wade, Evelyn, and Nora. Greta brought 2 more notices from neighbors. Lionel offered radio contact if phone lines went down in bad weather. A rancher Harlan had never met said his drainage ditch had been sighted the week after he refused an offer. Harlan stood at the edge with Cairn. For once he did not feel outside because no one wanted him in. He felt outside because he was learning how not to force the door. Near the exit, Conrad paused beside him. "Mister?" "Pierce," he said, though Harlan had not given his name to the room. Harlan turned. Conrad's smile was smaller up close. "I admire men who serve. I truly do. But local land issues can become complicated. Emotional involvement rarely clarifies them." Harlan looked at him for a long moment. You always talk like that? Conrad's smile tightened. Like what? Like you're trying to put a pillow over a sentence. For the first time all evening, Conrad had no ready answer. Cairn gave one low, bored huff. Harlan walked past him. It was after 9 when they returned to Evelyn's house. The porch light was out. Harlan knew he had left it on. He raised one hand, stopping everyone near the truck. Cairn was already alert, body low, nose lifted. The front door was locked. The house seemed undisturbed. But behind it, the darkroom door stood open 6 inches, black against the snow. Evelyn made a small sound. Harlan went first, flashlight low, every part of him cold and precise. The room inside had not been destroyed. That almost made it worse. Drawers stood open, negative sleeves had been shifted, boxes had been pulled and replaced too quickly. Someone had gone straight for the places that mattered. Cairn moved across the floor and stopped near the lower cabinet. His nose hovered over a dark smear on the wood. June crouched beside him, sniffed once, and pulled back. Solvent. Harlan looked at the open drawers, the disturbed shelves, the red safe light hanging still above the work counter. Wade spoke from the doorway, voice low. They were looking for the originals. No, Harlan said. He looked at the smear, then at the chemical trays, then at the old heater in the corner. They already know where the originals are. Evelyn stood behind him, pale but upright. Cairn's scarred ear tilted toward the dark. Harlan felt the shape of the next move before anyone said it aloud. Next time, he said, they won't come to search. No one asked what he meant. In the cold little darkroom, surrounded by photographs of a valley refusing to vanish, every person there understood. Next time, they would bring fire. The storm did not come down from the mountains. It rose. By 4 in the afternoon, snow climbed out of the valley like a living thing, thickening between the houses, swallowing fence posts, softening the road until every turn looked like the beginning of a mistake. The sky lowered over Mercy Vale in one great white lid. Pine branches bent, power lines hummed. The lake disappeared behind a curtain of blowing ice, and the mountains, those old stone kings, withdrew their faces from the world. Inside Evelyn Shaw's kitchen, the table had become a battlefield of paper, not the kind Harlan Pierce had known once. No sandbags, no spent brass, no blood-dark tourniquets. This war had folders, copies, paper clips, thumb drives, old photographs, exposure logs, and Wade Moran's fountain pen moving across yellow legal pads with priestly seriousness. We have enough for an emergency injunction, Wade said, though he did not sound pleased by it. If the judge accepts the filing and if the roads open by morning. June Baxter stood beside the sink with her parka half-zipped and snow melting from her boots. If the county office doesn't mysteriously misplace the structural review. Nora Whitcomb, who had arrived with 2 boxes from the library archives and the solemn expression of a woman smuggling sacred texts, adjusted her round glasses. I made 3 copies of the map packet, one here, one at the library, one in Lionel's radio shop, safe. Lionel Vance raised a hand from the corner where he was repairing a battery pack with wire, tape, and language unfit for public minutes. Safe is a generous word, metal cabinet with an attitude problem. Better than one darkroom full of originals, June said. Evelyn, wrapped in her green cardigan, looked toward the back window. Beyond it, the darkroom was only a square shadow in the storm, its black shutters almost invisible beneath the snow. The copies matter, Evelyn said. But the negatives matter differently. Wade nodded. Chain of custody, original sequence, film grain, exposure log correlation. Translation, Lionel said without looking up. Nora answered. The copies can tell the truth. The originals can prove it was not invented yesterday. Harlan stood near the back door, one shoulder against the frame. Cairn lay at his feet, but the dog had not truly rested all day. His food bowl sat untouched near the stove. Once, twice, 3 times he had risen to pace from the kitchen door to the hallway and back, his scarred ear flicking toward sounds no one else could sort from the storm. Harlan watched him. The dog was not acting afraid. Fear scattered a body. Cairn was gathering himself. That was worse. Wade began packing documents into a waterproof case. "I'll leave now. If I can get to the bridge before they close the lower road, I can stay at the motel near the courthouse and file as soon as the clerk opens." June snorted. "You'll get yourself buried in a ditch." "Lawyers prefer ditches with paperwork," Wade said. "Lawyers prefer pretending stubbornness is strategy." Evelyn looked between them. "No one drives unless they must." "I must," Wade said gently. "If Crown Meridian gets ahead of us with another filing, we lose time. Time is what they have been buying from the beginning." Harlan pushed off the doorframe. "I'll go with you." "No." Wade fastened the case. "You stay with Evelyn." That was sensible. Harlan hated sensible things when they placed people in different dangers. June zipped her parka. "I'm going to the county office. If the system goes down, I want hard copies stamped before it does. And if anybody tries to revise a file tonight, I want to be in the room when they lie about it." Nora gathered her archive boxes. "I'll return these to the library. The basement is dry, locked, and more loyal than most committees." Lionel lifted the repaired battery pack. "And I'm going to my shop before the phone lines get stupid. RadioNet goes live at 6, Channel 3. If the storm eats the cell towers, Betsy will still be rude and functional." He patted the old taped radio on his belt. Evelyn looked at all of them, and for a moment the house seemed too small to hold the fragile bravery of ordinary people making inconvenient choices. "This is how it starts, isn't it?" she said. Wade paused with his hand on the door. "What?" "Not with speeches, with people leaving warm rooms because paper needs protecting." No one had a good answer, so they left. By early evening, the storm had turned Mercy Vale into a lantern town. Every window was a square of gold behind snow. The power blinked twice, returned, then blinked again long enough for the house to inhale. Harlan set flashlights on the kitchen counter, checked the locks, brought extra firewood inside, and moved the box of remaining original negatives from the darkroom to the house, or tried to. Evelyn stopped him at the back door. "Not that box." Harlan stared at her. "We're not debating this." "Yes, we are." "No." "That particular box contains nitrate copies from an older batch and several unstable sleeves. It should not be brought near the stove." "Then we move it to the truck." "In this storm? To sit in freezing temperatures and condensation? You want to save evidence by ruining it." Harlan closed his eyes once. Evelyn's voice softened. "I already moved the most critical legal negatives into the house. The cemetery sequence, the spring vent rolls, the marker photographs. That last box holds fragile originals I need to re-sleeve before transport. I was supposed to do it tomorrow." Tomorrow! The word had become one of humanity's oldest jokes. Cairn rose from the kitchen floor. He did not go to the darkroom door. He went into the hallway. Harlan turned. On a hook near the old staircase hung Eli's field jacket, the one Evelyn had taken from the wooden box after the afternoon of sorting. It was faded olive, patched at one shoulder, too light for Wyoming winter, but too heavy with memory to be stored away again. Cairn stood beneath it. He lifted one paw and scratched once at the wall. Not hard, not frantic. Once. Then he looked at Harlan. The kitchen fell silent. Evelyn's face changed slowly, as though a sound from 20 years ago had reached her late. "He used to do that," she whispered. "Who?" "Cairn, when Eli came home and pretended he was fine." Her hand went to the back of a chair. He would sit by Eli's coat and scratch the wall until Eli stopped smiling for everyone else. Harlan felt the old letter inside his coat. You pretend quiet means control. Cairn scratched again. This time, from somewhere beyond the house, beneath the wind, came a faint sound. Not thunder, not a branch. A vehicle door closing. Harlan moved. The house became angles and tasks. He cut the kitchen light, then the hall. Evelyn reached for the camera bag, but Harlan caught her wrist gently. Stay here. My dark room. Stay here. She is not a room, Evelyn snapped. She is 40 years of my eyes. That stopped him, not because it was practical, because it was true. He let go of her wrist. Behind me, no closer than the porch unless I say. Evelyn nodded once. Cairn was already at the back door, body low, breath silent. Harlan eased the door open. The storm struck like thrown salt. Snow flew sideways across the yard. The dark room was a black shape 20 yards away, its roof nearly vanished under white. Beyond it, near the tree line, a boxy vehicle without markings sat half hidden, engine off, snow collecting on the hood. The dark room door was shut. Then a thin line of light appeared beneath it. Red light. Someone was inside. Harlan stepped into the storm. The cold took his face. Cairn moved at his left knee, not ahead, not behind. Evelyn followed to the porch, wrapped in a coat, one hand gripping the rail. Harlan crossed the yard low and fast, boots sinking. Halfway there, the wind shifted, and a smell came through the snow. Solvent, sharp, industrial, familiar from the smear on the floor the night before. At the dark room wall, Harlan stopped beside the door and listened. A man's voice muttered inside. Another answered, too low for words. No loud threats, no villain speeches, just men doing a job. That made Harlan angrier than hatred would have. He signaled Cairn to wait. The dog's body trembled once, not from fear, but restraint. Then glass broke inside. Evelyn left the porch. Harlan saw her moving from the corner of his eye, a pale figure in blowing snow, and every careful plan collapsed under the weight of a mother who had already lost too much to stand back while memory burned. "Evelyn!" he hissed. The darkroom door opened from inside. A man in a black knit cap stepped out carrying a metal can. He was broad through the shoulders, face half covered by a scarf, gloved hands slick with chemical shine. He saw Harlan and froze. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then the man swung the can. Harlan stepped inside the arc, caught the wrist, and drove the man back against the doorframe. The can hit the snow, spilling liquid that steamed faintly in the cold. The second man inside cursed and knocked over a tray. Cairn barked once, deep and violent. The man in the doorway flinched harder than he should have. Harlan could have broken the wrist. The knowledge passed through him cleanly, old and available. He did not. He twisted just enough to drop the man to his knees in the snow and shoved him away from the door. Inside, smoke had begun to gather near the ceiling. A flame crawled along the edge of a lower shelf where liquid had been splashed near a space heater. The red safe light turned the smoke into a wound opening in the room. Evelyn pushed past Harlan. "No!" She reached toward the cabinet. Cairn moved faster than his age should have allowed. He did not attack the second man, who was already scrambling toward the back window. He did not chase the first man, who stumbled toward the dark vehicle. Cairn lunged sideways and blocked Evelyn with his body, driving his shoulder into her knees hard enough to stop her without knocking her down. Then he seized the strap of a canvas film satchel lying near the lower cabinet and dragged it backward, claws scraping concrete. Harlan saw the choice in front of him. The second man was halfway through the back window. The first was running. The fire was spreading. Evelyn was trying to reach around Cairn. For a younger version of Harlan, the fleeing men would have become the whole world. Targets, pursuit, capture. A clean answer to anger. But Eli's letter burned colder in his coat than the fire on the shelf. Take care of someone who is still alive. Harlan grabbed Evelyn around the waist and pulled her toward the door. "No!" she shouted, fighting him with more strength than her size promised. "The negatives. Cairn has them. Not all. You first." A canister popped in the heat, sharp as a small shot. Cairn flinched. For one terrible heartbeat, Harlan felt the dog's old wound rise in the room. Noise, fire, men moving too fast, everything that had once made trainers call him unreliable. Cairn lowered his body over the satchel and did not run. Harlan released Evelyn outside the door, turned back, and went in low. Smoke clawed his throat. He seized the satchel strap Cairn had dragged clear, then grabbed the nearest archival box from the counter. The flames had not reached it yet. Heat licked his gloves. "Out!" he rasped. Cairn backed toward him, dragging the satchel another foot before Harlan took it. The old dog's eyes streamed from smoke. Harlan shoved the satchel through the doorway, then pushed Cairn after it. Behind him, another shelf caught. The red room filled with black breath. Outside, Evelyn fell to her knees in the snow beside the satchel, opening it with shaking hands. Film sleeves, contact rolls. The last lake photograph of Eli. The cemetery sequence. Not all of it. Enough to make her sob once, hard and furious. The fleeing vehicle roared to life near the trees. Harlan turned toward it. A beam of white light cut through the storm from the road. Then another, and another. Not sirens, not cavalry. Flashlights. Lionel Vance's voice cracked through the wind before the man himself appeared. "I swear before all the saints of dead circuitry, if anybody burned my favorite photographer's shed, I am becoming unpleasant." He came through the snow with a fire extinguisher under one arm and his radio bouncing against his chest. Greta Sloan followed with 2 more extinguishers from her saddle shop, silver braid whipping over her shoulder. Nora Whitcomb struggled behind them, carrying a wool blanket and a box of archive sleeves under her coat, as if saving paper from weather were a sacrament. A county SUV slid to a stop near the drive. Deputy Marshal Owen Rusk climbed out into the storm. Harlan had seen him in town before, tall, broad, tan sheriff's parka dusted white, winter cowboy hat pulled low, a thick mustache rimed with snow. He had the tired eyes of a man who had spent years deciding which problems were not his. Tonight he looked at the smoking darkroom, the fleeing vehicle's taillights vanishing toward the service road, Evelyn on her knees in the snow, and Harlan holding a half-burned archival box. Something in his face gave way, not dramatically. Enough. Lionel shoved a radio into Owen's chest. "Channel 3, unless your official one wants to pretend the storm is a valid excuse." Owen took it. For a second, Harlan expected procedure, questions, hesitation, the old comfortable phrase, civil dispute. Instead, Owen keyed the radio. "This is Deputy Marshal Owen Rusk requesting state police response to suspected arson, evidence tampering, and assault at the Shaw property in Mercy Vale. Roads are compromised. Suspects fleeing in an unmarked dark utility vehicle toward the South Service Road." He looked at Harlan. "Plate? Snow-covered? Last 2, maybe 7-4. Owen repeated it. Greta and Lionel hit the fire first. June's truck skidded into the drive moments later, headlights wild in the storm. She jumped out before it stopped fully, grabbed the second extinguisher, and went to the doorway like a woman arriving late to an argument with fire itself. Wade's voice came over Lionel's radio, thin with static. He was trapped near the bridge, unable to get through, but alive and furious. "Preserve the scene," he said. "Photograph everything. Do not let anyone move the cans." "Wade!" Lionel shouted into the radio while spraying foam. "We are currently negotiating with Flames." "After the Flames," Wade snapped. Nora wrapped Evelyn in the blanket and guided her back from the smoke. Evelyn clutched the film satchel with both arms, her face streaked with soot and tears. Cairn stood beside her, coughing once, then shaking snow from his coat. His scarred ear lay flat for a moment before rising again. Harlan crouched and ran a hand over the dog's chest, checking breath, ribs, heat, injury. "You stayed," he whispered. Cairn leaned into him, heavy and alive. The fire did not take the darkroom, not all of it. One shelf blackened, a corner of the counter burned. Several empty paper boxes collapsed into wet ash. The red safe light cracked from heat, but remained hanging, a dark eye over the room. The smell of smoke and chemical foam filled the yard. But the satchel survived. The box Harlan carried survived. The people survived. That mattered first. For a while, the storm swallowed all speeches. People moved in short commands. Lionel kept the radio net alive. Greta hauled snow in buckets to cool the wall. June photographed the spill pattern, the metal can, the footprints before the wind erased them. Nora recorded times on a library notepad because no one had given her a form, and she did not require permission to be useful. Owen stood near the darkroom door, looking at the false work order one of the men had dropped in the snow. Crown Meridian Subcontracted Winterization Review. His jaw tightened. Harlan came to stand beside him. Owen did not look away from the paper. "I called this civil." Harlan said nothing. "I had 3 complaints on my desk, maybe 4. Figured old land, new money, lawyers circling, happens every decade." Owen's gloved hand closed around the paper. I did not look close. The wind moved between them. Harlan watched Evelyn through the snow. She was sitting on the porch now, Nora beside her, Cairn at her feet, and the satchel held in her lap like a rescued child of light. "Look now," Harlan said. Owen nodded once. "I am." And maybe that was how a machine began to fail. Not with one heroic blow, but with one man inside it, finally refusing to look away. By midnight the fire was out, the scene marked, and the originals moved under guard to 3 separate places: the house safe, Nora's library archive, and Lionel's metal cabinet with an attitude problem. State police would not arrive until the plows broke through, but Owen had already made the call on a recorded channel. Wade had the transmission logged. Lionel had 3 neighbors who had heard it and would testify loudly whether asked or not. The darkroom stood wounded but standing. In the red-black ruin near the work counter, Evelyn found one wet photograph stuck to the floor by foam. Harlan tried to stop her from bending, but she waved him off. She lifted it carefully. The image was damaged at the edges, but the center remained. Eli Shaw, younger than grief, standing by Lake Larkwater with one hand resting on Cairn's head. Snow behind him. Sun in his eyes. His smile caught halfway between mischief and goodbye. Evelyn held it out to Harlan. "No," he said softly. "That's yours." "It is ours tonight." He took one corner. She held the other. Between them, the photograph trembled in the storm wind, wet, scorched, not destroyed. Cairn looked up at it, then lowered himself onto the porch boards with a tired sigh. Around them, Mercy Vale breathed in the dark, a few flashlights, a few stubborn neighbors, a deputy finally awake, a radio net crackling against the mountain weather. The white storm had tried to erase every track, but in the wounded red room behind Evelyn Shaw's house, enough had survived to remember the way forward. The morning after the storm, Mercy Vale did not look victorious. It looked exhausted. Snow lay in wind-carved ridges against porch steps and fence posts. Branches bowed under ice. The road to the county line remained closed until noon, and the plows moved like tired yellow beetles through the white. Evelyn Shaw's dark room stood behind the house with one wall blackened, the doorframe scorched, and a strip of crime scene tape snapping in the cold wind like a small, angry flag. The fire had not taken everything. That was the first miracle. The second was that no one said miracle too loudly, because everyone in Mercy Vale understood the difference between grace and luck. Grace had arrived in work gloves, radiostatic, library boxes, fire extinguishers, and an old German shepherd coughing smoke out of his lungs while refusing to leave the porch. By 10 that morning, state police had reached the Shaw property behind 2 plow trucks. They photographed the spill patterns, collected the metal can, bagged the false winterization papers, and took statements from people who had never expected to become witnesses before breakfast. Deputy Marshal Owen Rusk stood by his county SUV with snow on his hat and shame in his shoulders. He did not make speeches. He wrote. Harlan noticed that first. Owen wrote down everything. The time Lionel's radio call came through, the direction of the fleeing vehicle, the smell of solvent, the false work order, the earlier complaints he had dismissed too quickly. The deputy's black notebook, once thin with habit and empty space, began filling with the weight of what he should have seen before. At one point, Owen stepped onto the porch where Evelyn sat, wrapped in Nora Whitcomb's blanket, the rescued film satchel on the table beside her. "Mrs. Shaw," he said. Evelyn looked up. Owen removed his hat. His hair was flattened from cold and sweat, and without the hat, he looked less like an officer and more like a tired man standing before a debt. "I called this a civil dispute," he said, more than once. "Yes," Evelyn replied, "I was wrong." The apology did not repair the burned shelf. It did not reverse the ravine, the false notices, the pressure on Greta's barn, or Lionel's lane. But it entered the morning cleanly, without decoration. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. "Then be useful," she said. Owen nodded. "I intend to?" That was how the next part began, not with applause, with intention. The investigation opened like a stubborn door. The false work order led to a subcontractor hired through a property services shell company. The shell company led to acquisition consultants tied to Crown Meridian's land team. The brake fitting from Evelyn's Subaru was examined, photographed, and logged. June Baxter's structural report, copied before anyone could bury it, showed repeated use of wrong property photographs, recycled language, and hazard ratings unsupported by measurements. Wade Moran filed for an emergency injunction the first clear morning after the storm. He walked into court wearing his gray suit, his old tweed coat, and the expression of a man who had spent years sharpening patience into a blade. His voice did not rise when he presented the documents. That was Wade's gift. He made outrage wear a tie and stand upright until even a judge had to respect it. The injunction paused Crown Meridian's immediate acquisition activity in the disputed parcels. Then came the review, then the state inquiry. Then the long, slow embarrassment of officials being asked why 3 porches in 3 different corners of the valley had somehow been photographed from the same angle of the same wrong cabin. Conrad Bellamy did not get dragged away in handcuffs. Harlan had not expected him to. Men like Conrad rarely left a room with shouting behind them. They left through statements issued by firms with polished letterheads. Crown Meridian announced a temporary withdrawal from active community transition discussions pending procedural review. Conrad's name disappeared from the project website before the week ended. Lionel read the statement aloud in his radio shop and declared it a coward wearing cologne. No one improved on that description, but something had shifted. For the first time, the signatures did not stand alone. Beside them stood photographs, radio logs, witness statements, inspection measurements, archive maps, exposure logs, and ordinary people who had grown tired of being called confused in rooms where they knew the floorboards better than any consultant. June lost her county contract before February. The letter came by email, polite enough to be insulting. She printed it, folded it once, and used it as a coaster under her coffee at Evelyn's kitchen table. "I have been fired by better cowards," she said. Evelyn gave her a look. "Does that help?" "No, but it improves the sentence. June did not soften much after that. She still corrected Wade's measurements. She still told Harlan he held a level like it had personally disappointed him. But when the State Engineering Board asked for her full report, she sent it with every photograph, every measurement, and a note so precise it practically wore steel-toed boots. Later, when someone asked why she risked the work, she gave no grand answer. "My husband died because a report lied," she said. "I am no longer available for that kind of paperwork." Wade returned to court with evidence strong enough to carry its own shadow. Nora Whitcomb established a Mercy Vale community archive in the library basement, labeling boxes with the focus of a queen dividing kingdoms. Lionel upgraded his winter radio network from a hobby to an official emergency channel, though he insisted on keeping the same battered unit. "Betsy survived the storm," he said. "That makes her more qualified than half the county." Greta Sloan organized neighbors to repair one another's barns before more false notices could arrive. She brought saddle leather scraps to Evelyn's house and made new straps for the rescued film satchels, stitching them thick and plain. "Evidence ought to have proper handles," Greta said. It was the kind of sentence Mercy Vale understood. Spring did not come quickly to Wyoming. It negotiated. Snow retreated from south-facing slopes first, then returned out of spite. The lake softened at the edges. Roofs began to drip. The dark room behind Evelyn's house smelled for weeks of smoke, wet wood, and chemical foam. Harlan replaced the scorched doorframe. Lionel rewired the safe light. June inspected the wall twice and insulted the old studs with enough affection to suggest they had passed. Evelyn did not rebuild the room exactly as it had been. "That room was always for developing what had already been seen," she told Harlan one afternoon, watching him sand a new threshold. "Maybe now it should help people see before it is too late." So the dark room became something else. The red light room. "Not a museum," Evelyn insisted. Museums were places where people lowered their voices because everything important had already happened. The red light room would be a working memory, part gallery, part archive, part place to sit when a person had no words but needed proof that ordinary lives left marks. They hung the first photographs on a bright morning when snow still covered the cemetery hill. There were miners outside a closed shaft, their faces blackened and grinning. There was Greta at 28, holding a saddle nearly as large as herself. Lionel and his late wife stood beside the radio shop in a summer rain. Harris Cole appeared in one frame beside an old county marker, looking bored and honest. There were porch steps, fence lines, the old access road, the steaming spring vents, and the cemetery under 3 different winters. At the center, Evelyn hung the damaged photograph from the storm. Eli Shaw by Lake Larkwater, one hand on young Cairn's head. The edges were scorched. A corner had bubbled from heat. The image had survived imperfectly, which made it truer. Cairn lay beneath it during the hanging, muzzle silver, eyes half closed, as if the photograph were less a memory than a window he had been waiting for someone to open. Harlan stood a few feet back with a hammer in his hand and no idea what to do with his face. Evelyn noticed. "You may breathe in here," she said. "I was." "Technically, perhaps." He almost smiled. The legal work continued beyond the opening of the room. Mercy Vale entered a state conservation review, then a community preservation process. The geothermal rights were frozen pending public oversight. The cemetery boundary was restored and formally recognized. Several homeowners who had sold under pressure were given grounds to challenge the transactions. Not everyone got everything back. The world remained too stubborn for clean endings. But the valley was no longer being erased quietly. That mattered. One evening, after Harlan helped Wade move a filing cabinet into the library archive, he drove alone to a turnout above Lake Larkwater. Cairn sat in the passenger seat, tired from the day, his head resting against the window. The lake below held the last orange of sunset in its cracks. Harlan took out his phone. Claire Donnelly's number had remained in his contacts for years, untouched and heavier than any weapon. He called before courage could become another form of delay. She answered on the fourth ring. "Harlan?" Her voice was careful. Not cold, not warm. Careful was more than he deserved. "Claire," he said. Cairn lifted his head. Harlan looked out at the frozen lake and let the silence come. For once, he did not use it as a wall. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said. A pause. "All right. I need to say something properly. I should have said it years ago, but I kept turning quiet into punishment and pretending it was control." The line remained open. Wind moved snow across the turnout. "I made you live beside a locked room," Harlan continued, "and when you knocked, I acted like the knocking was the problem." Claire breathed in softly. Somewhere on her end, a dish clinked, or maybe a cup. "I don't know what to do with that yet," she said. "I know." "I'm glad you said it." That was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was a cleared strip of road after a storm, narrow, rough, but passable enough that no one had to pretend the mountain was closed forever. When the call ended, Harlan sat still for a long time. Cairn placed his muzzle on Harlan's wrist. "I know," Harlan said. This time, he did not pull away. The red light room opened to the public on a Saturday, with snow falling lightly, the kind that seemed chosen for beauty rather than punishment. There was no ribbon. Evelyn refused one. "This is not a grocery store," she said. Nora brought archival labels. Lionel brought a portable radio and 2 thermoses of coffee, one of which Wade immediately ruined by improving it. June placed the final binder of structural reports on a table near the entrance. Owen arrived in uniform, hat in hand, and stood by the door for a while before stepping inside. Greta brought a leather guest book. "Paper deserves a spine," she said. People came slowly at first, then in twos, then in small groups. They removed hats, stamped snow from boots, and found themselves on the walls. Their roads, their barns, their parents, their porches, their hills, their names. No one called the valley empty after that. Near noon, Wade took a sip of his own coffee and grimaced. Harlan looked over. That should be entered as a separate offense. Wade considered the cup. Harsh. Accurate. June nodded. The man finally understands evidence. Evelyn laughed then, not loudly, not like someone untouched by grief. Her laughter had cracks in it, and because of that, it let in light. Cairn slept beneath Eli's photograph, front paws crossed, scarred ear relaxed. He no longer looked like a sentry guarding a wound. He looked like a keeper of a threshold, an old dog resting where the dead and the living could pass without frightening each other. Harlan stood near the doorway as people moved around him. Once, that would have been his escape position. Now it was simply a place from which he could open the door when someone new arrived. Outside, Mercy Vale shone under thin falling snow. The lake, the cemetery hill, the patched porches, the old radio shop, the saddle barn, the library, the White House beside the water. All of it remained imperfect, unpaid for in places, weather-beaten, vulnerable, alive. Harlan touched the folded letter inside his coat. For years he had believed the largest debt was owed to death, to the man who had pulled him from dust, to the names that returned at night, to every voice that had gone silent while his own breath continued. But death, he was beginning to understand, was not asking him to build a shrine out of pain. The debt was to the living, to the woman who still opened a darkroom after fire, to the engineer who refused to let numbers lie, to the lawyer who came back after losing, to the deputy who finally looked closely, to the neighbors who walked into a storm with extinguishers, radios, blankets, and anger honest enough to warm their hands. And to the old dog sleeping beneath Eli's picture. Cairn hadn't led him back to the past. Not really. Cairn had led him through it. Harlan opened the door for an elderly rancher carrying a framed photograph under one arm. Snow blew in softly around the man's boots, bright and harmless for once. Behind Harlan, Evelyn's red room glowed with faces the world had failed to erase. Ahead of him, Mercy Vale breathed in winter light, and for the first time in years, Harlan Pierce did not feel like a man surviving someone else's sacrifice. He felt like a man still capable of answering it. Sometimes the greatest debt we carry is not to the past, but to the good we can still do today. Harlan thought loyalty meant suffering quietly for the man who saved him. But through Evelyn, Mercy Vale, and one old German shepherd named Cairn, he learned that love does not ask us to become monuments of grief. It asks us to become doors that still open. Maybe grace does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes as a dog refusing to leave, a neighbor walking through snow, or one honest apology finally spoken after years of silence. If this story reminded you of someone you miss, someone who helped you stand again, or a small mercy that found you at the right time, share it in the comments. And if stories like this still matter to you, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next one. May God give peace to every tired heart, still trying to do right with the life they have left.